So should you take the COVID-19 vaccine or not? What data do you need in order to make an informed decision? That's what I'm going to present to you in this short presentation. But before I do that, I want you to know that as of today, there are more than 1,463 healthcare workers who have died because of COVID-19 during this pandemic in the United States only. The Guardian and the Kaiser Health Network are investigating why did they die. And the vaccines that we are talking about are the mRNA-based vaccines that are typically encapsulated with lipid nanoparticles that help to protect them from degradation and promote cellular uptake. Once inside the cells, the mRNA gets encoded on the ribosomes to form protein S. This protein is presented to the antigen-presenting cells in the body to elicit B and T cell immunity against the protein. And the decision on whether we should take the vaccine or not should be an informed decision. And in order to make that informed decision, we should have answers to basic questions. The first question would be, is the vaccine effective in the prevention of the disease and its transmission? The second question would be, is the vaccine safe and are there any serious adverse events associated with its administration? Then we should know the risks and benefits of taking the vaccines versus the disease itself. If we know the answers to these three questions, at that time the decision can be made easily on whether we should be vaccinated or not. And we are going to use the study that was published in the New England Journal of Medicine about BioNTech and Pfizer vaccine to be able to answer the first two questions. The study included close to 44,000 participants aged 16 years or higher who were assigned to receive either the vaccine or the placebo by intramuscular injections. The vaccine was given in 2 doses on day number 0, and after 3 weeks the second dose was given. And the participants were followed for an average of 2 months for the safety and the development of symptomatic COVID-19. The results of the efficacy are depicted on this graph, where you can see the COVID-19 cases in the vaccine group on the red line and the COVID-19 cases in the placebo group on the blue line. The inbox is a magnification of the first 21 days of the study. You can clearly see that these two lines started to diverge on day number 12 of the study. This is an indication that we have an early protection by the vaccine starting as soon as 12 days after the first dose. Between the first dose and the second dose, which was on day number 21, we had vaccine efficacy of about 52%. 7 days after the second dose, we see that these two lines continued to diverge, and we had an overall vaccine efficacy of about 95%. We had a total of 9 cases in the vaccine group and 172 cases in the placebo group. If we would repeat the experiment 100 times, 95 times the results would be between 90% and 97%. When they looked at subgroups in this study, whether we were looking at different age groups, different sex, different race and ethnicity, including BMI higher than 30, or participants who had chronic conditions, vaccine efficacy was generally consistent with that observed in the overall population. The study was not powered to detect differences in these subgroups, but in general, the efficacy was similar to the overall population. We should also know that the study did not include pregnant women, children of 16 years or less, or immunosuppressed patients. So we are confident that the vaccine's efficacy is between 90 to 97%. However, we're not sure about whether the vaccine would decrease the transmission of the virus in the community. We go now to the second question. Is the vaccine safe, and are there any serious adverse events associated with the vaccine? In order to answer this question, we go to the same study and we look at the adverse events. On the left side, you see the local events, and you can see majority of participants had pain at the injection site. Some of them had redness or swelling. This is usually self-limited. Within 2-3 days, the pain has disappeared. On the right side, you see the systemic events, and the first graph is systemic events in younger people between 16 and 55 years of age after the first dose, and then the second graph would be after the second dose, and the bottom two graphs would be for participants more than 55 years of age after the first dose and then after the second dose. You can see around 50% of people had fatigue after the first dose, more pronounced in younger population and after the second dose. Similarly, the headache was seen around 40%, again more pronounced after the second dose, and more in younger population compared to older population. You can see here smaller percentages experienced chills, vomiting, diarrhea, muscle pain, joint pain, or fever. There were no serious side effects associated with this vaccine in the study. However, the question would be whether the sample size was big enough to detect any serious adverse events that may occur in a greater percentage than what it is in the background rate in the community. In order to answer this question, I pulled this table from the article by Evans published in Journal of Infectious Disease in 2009. And in any study, we need to determine the sample size needed to detect a serious adverse event that is greater than the background rate in the community. Assuming that we have a 5% risk of type 1 error and the power of the study is 90%. This is the number of participants that we need to have in the study for any increased rate of this disease in the vaccinated population compared to the background rate. So if the background rate in the general population of a disease is only 1 in 10,000 people, we need 16,000 participants to detect five-fold higher increase in this rate in vaccinated population. And of course, if this rate is higher, we would need lower number of participants, as you see here. If the background rate is rare, 1 in 100,000, at that time we need 160,000 participants in the study to detect five-fold higher, and of course it would be lower than this if the rate of that disease is much higher than five-fold in the vaccinated population. And if it is very rare, 1 in a million, at that time you can see the number of participants that we need to have in the study, it's much higher. Now our study has 44,000 participants in it. So with this number of participants, the study would not be able to detect anything that is happening at a five-fold or higher, and the rate in the background is 1 in 100,000. So if we take an example, Guillain-Barré is 1 to 2 in 100,000 people. Similarly, acute transverse myelitis is 1 in around 100,000. So potentially the study may not be powerful enough to detect cases of Guillain-Barré syndrome or acute transverse myelitis happening at the five-fold increase in the vaccinated population compared to the general population. Similarly, won't be able to detect anything that has a tenfold increase in the rate compared to the general population for anything that is rare in the community at a rate of 1 in a million or less. And back to our study, the study has more than 83% probability of detecting at least one adverse event if the true incidence is 1 in 10,000. At the same time, the study has to run for a duration of 2 years in order to detect any potential delayed adverse events. So the questions about this study would be that it has lower probability to detect a rare adverse event if the true rate is less than 1 in 10,000, and we need a larger study to be able to detect this rare adverse events. The other problem is that we may have adverse events occurring more than 8 to 14 weeks. We know that 90% of serious adverse events are detected within the first 6 weeks of the vaccination. But in order to detect any events that occurring later than this, we need to expand the duration of this study up to 2 years. However, given the high vaccine efficacy, ethical and practical barriers prevent following placebo recipients for 2 years without offering active immunization. In addition, and based on the burden of the disease and the magnitude of the pandemic, FDA has given emergency use authorization to 2 of the mRNA vaccines, and will continue to monitor the safety of these vaccines with the existing 3 systems. Number 1, vaccine adverse event reporting system. Number 2, vaccine safety data link and post-licensure rapid immunization safety monitoring. And number 3, the clinical immunization safety assessment project. In addition, there is a new safety system for essential workers. Some of you who got vaccinated already using this, and you get a text message on a daily basis for the first week after vaccination, and weekly thereafter till 6 weeks. Any clinically important event would be reported to the vaccine adverse event reporting system, and a follow-up call will be given to that individual person. If we go back to our question here, I think we can say that the vaccine is safe in general. However, we have a system in place to continue to monitor to see if we have any of the delayed or rare events that could not be detected with our study. And then we have to weigh the risk and the benefits to make that decision whether we should take the vaccine or not. And I want to mention first that some of people would say that I need to see long-term results before I can take any vaccine. This is based on the fact that people are more comfortable with known risks than unknown risks. So they are fine to get COVID-19 infection. They can deal with the consequences of the disease, but they're not fine to deal with the unknown consequences of COVID-19 vaccine. At the same time, bad outcome from inaction is more tolerable than bad outcome from action. The inaction here is the decision not to take the vaccine compared to the action, which is the decision to take the vaccine. So if somebody took the vaccine and bad outcome occurred, they have guilt and they blame themselves about this action. However, they can tolerate any bad outcome happening because of having the disease and dealing with the consequences of this because this is from Allah, and they say, well, I'm okay with this, I can deal with the consequences as long as it is not his own decision to do something that would result in bad outcome. And the third thing is that people would overestimate rare risks and underestimate common risks. And the rare risks here are the risk associated with the vaccine, which are very rare, compared to the common risks associated with the disease, which are happening at a very high rate, as we will see in the next few slides. And let me elaborate a bit about the disease burden. And if you get infected with COVID-19, that means that you have a chance to get admitted to the hospital between 10 to 20%. And the mortality is between 0.39 to 1.3%. This means that we have 390 to 1,300 deaths in every 100,000 cases of COVID-19. Not only that, patients who recovered from COVID-19 had persistent or chronic symptoms. We call those long haulers, and this is happening at a very high rate, and some of those symptoms are very disturbing and debilitating. 55% of people experienced fatigue, 42% experienced dyspnea, and 34% experienced memory loss. In addition, there are a series of other symptoms that persisted and are very disturbing to the patient, especially with the loss of smell and taste. In addition to the long haulers, we have identified long-term organ damages that have been documented at a very high rate of hospitalized patients after discharges, especially with myocardial injuries in 78% of cases, and decreased lung functions with pulmonary fibrosis in good percentage of patients. And this slide shows the details of hospitalization and death rates in COVID-19 infection among different age groups. This is taken from a study published by Verity in the Lancet Infectious Disease, and you can see that even younger people can have severe disease and they can die from the disease. If you take, for example, the age group 20 to 29 years of age, there would be a total of 600 hospitalizations and 30 deaths for every 100,000 cases of COVID-19 in this age group. As you see, if you go higher on the age group, you can see that hospitalization rate is higher and death rate is much higher. If you get to the age group 50 to 59, we would have 5,100 hospitalizations and 600 deaths for every 100,000 cases of COVID-19. In the age group of 80 and above, there would be a total of 13,600 hospitalizations and 9,300 deaths for every 100,000 cases. This is a very high death rate, much higher than what we have in the influenza altogether. With this information in mind, if you decide not to take the vaccine, your chance of getting COVID-19 disease is about 50%. It may be higher or lower than this. But if you get COVID-19 infection, you may have persistent or chronic COVID symptoms in about 40 to 50% of the cases. You may require to be hospitalized in around 10 to 20% of the cases, and you may end up with organ damage in up to 78% in severe cases. The death rate is about 0.39% to 1.3%, which is translated to 390 to 1,300 deaths per 100,000 cases. On the other hand, if you decide to be vaccinated, the potential of serious side effects is much less than 5 in 100 to 1 million vaccines. And these serious side effects may not necessarily be death. You need to compare these potential serious side effects that were not detected in the current studies with the known consequences of COVID-19 disease before making a decision about the vaccine. In summary, the vaccine is effective, is safe in general, and the benefits outweigh the risks. And when you make a decision, please be responsible for your loved ones, for your community, and for the healthcare workers. Thank you very much.